Good evening. Tonight we'll delve deep into the arduous, uncertain, undone glorious aspects of scientific discovery. Forget time minus giant flower power. Those chapters that seemed psychedelic revolutions, once reeked of sterile laboratories, cold obsession, and the tobacco scent in windowless rooms. Truth plunged into that world, the world behind the curtain. Your mind will become the battlefield, and you won't even realize you're already a warrior. So before you unwind, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely love my content. Tell me in the comments where you're from, what time it is locally. Witnessing global viewers join is always mesmerizing. Turn your phone screen down. Set the volume to whisper. Let's begin. The story didn't start with the clamor of rebellion. It was born in the quiet, sterile precision of a laboratory in Basel, Switzerland, in this tranquil city. As the outside world plunged into the torrent of war, chemist Albert Hofmann was buried in his work. The Sandoz Pharmaceuticals employee was meticulous in his approach. His research in the late 1930s, while not revolutionary, held significant academic value. The ergot fungus he studied was a parasitic monster that ravaged dry crops. For centuries, this fungus was primarily known as a toxin. It caused a dreaded affliction, known as street ants fire, where sufferers experienced gangrenous convulsions and terrifying hallucinations. Yet Hofmann remained convinced this dark fungus held medicinal secrets. He dedicated himself to finding compounds that could enhance blood circulation and respiratory function. To develop practical, marketable drugs, he studied each derivative in turn, meticulously isolating and synthesizing every substance. In 1938, he reached the 25th compound in the series, naming it with a scientist's dry poetic as lysergic acetylhame, a LSD-25. When tested on laboratory animals, they became restless. They first stood on end, but showed no other significant effect. This clearly wasn't the circulatory stimulant he sought. Hofmann documented the results. After submitting his report, like all outstanding scholars extricating themselves from research dead ends, he shelved the LSD-25 reagent bottle on his laboratory rack, where it lay undisturbed for 5 years, a forgotten molecule in the dusty corner of a quiet laboratory. Meanwhile, beyond the neutral borders of Switzerland, World War I was engulfing the entire European continent. History is always filled with such silent moments, where shelved ideas await their moment to emerge. Until one spring afternoon, in 1943, an extraordinary event occurred, for reasons he himself could not fully explain. Hofmann felt the powerful urge to revisit this failed experiment. He later called it a peculiar premonition, an intuition defying rigorous scientific thought. Why revisit a substance proven useless? He could not explain it. Yet on April 16th, he synthesized a new batch of LSD-25. As he worked in his sunlit laboratory, his body began to feel unwell, not from illness, but from an uncanny sense of strangeness. A peculiar dizziness swept through him, his perceptions shifting dramatically, deeply unsettling. He had to stop working. Returning home, he collapsed onto the sofa, closing his eyes to rest. What followed was not sleep. He wrote, it was a state of mild intoxication, accompanied by an intensely active imagination. Endless fantastical scenes flooded his vision, as bizarre forms shifted within kaleidoscopic bursts of color. 2 hours later, the visions faded. He was left with profound astonishment and an unshakable question: what had actually happened? He was certain he had not ingested any drugs. Being meticulous by nature, he speculated that perhaps, merely perhaps, trace residues had been absorbed through the skin of his fingertips. If so, if even an imperceptibly minute amount could trigger such an intense effect, then LSD-25 was a substance of almost unimaginable potency, a chemical spectre. As a scientist, he knew hypotheses required empirical validation. A single accidental exposure was insufficient. Rigorous experimentation was imperative. Thus, 3 days later, on the afternoon of April 19th, he prepared for a new journey. He resolved to ingest what he believed to be the minimal effective dose. He measured out 250 micrograms, 1-1,000th of a milligram, a few nearly invisible grains of chemical powder. In pharmacology, this was a homeopathic dose, merely a whisper of the substance. He dissolved the powder in water and drank it, unaware that the dose he had just ingested would later be regarded as substantial, even heroic. For about 40 minutes, nothing happened. He recorded in his journal no reaction. Then the world began to melt. The initial signs were subtle creeping anxiety, distorted vision, intense sense of unreality. The intensity and speed of these sensations far exceeded expectations. Panicked, he asked his lab assistant, Susie, to accompany him home, but it was 1943. War regulations prohibited motor vehicle use. No official vehicles, no taxis. Cycling was the only way home. Thus began Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann's journey into history. A for minor smile by cried through Basel's streets became humanity's first conscious psychedelic journey. The familiar route home transformed into a perilous trek through hostile terrain. The road ahead undulated like a river, buildings on either side breathing, warping, their facades rippling like water. Mrs. R., the neighbor, that kind minus-hearted woman, met him as he returned, only to transform before his eyes into a sinister, evil witch wearing a colorful mask. Fear utterly consumed him, a cold, chemical terror. He was certain he was having a mental breakdown, his self-awareness dissolving into nothingness. He believed he was about to die. Upon entering his home, the hallucinations intensified. Furniture swelled and twisted into grotesque, threatening shape. Floor patterns spiraled into bottomless whirlpools. He had Susie call the doctor, and asked the neighbor, that witch, for milk, convinced it was the universal cure. When the doctor arrived, he found no physical abnormalities. Heart rate normal, breathing steady. The sole symptom was extreme pupil dilation, almost swallowing the irises. As the doctor's steady presence reassured him he hadn't truly departed, a profound shift quietly occurred. Fear began to recede, replaced by unprecedented wonder. Terror yielded to a strange, transcendent joy. He closed his eyes. What greeted him was not darkness, but an explosion of geometric patterns, intricate spiral mandalas, a gushing cascade of color. The sound of passing cars was no longer noise, but a visual symphony. Each sound transformed into color. Each hue crystallized into emotion. For several hours, he drifted through a universe of his own creation, becoming a traveler within consciousness. When he awoke the next morning, the world had returned to its place. Furniture stood still. Streets remained solid. Yet everything was different. Strolling through the garden, he felt the breath of rebirth. Dewdrops on leaf tips shimmered with profound, sacred light. Bird songs became him. The world was thoroughly cleansed, radiating beauty and depth never seen before. He realized he hadn't discovered a cure for the circulatory system, but had accidentally touched the key to the soul. He opened a door. In the years that followed, the entire world would be invited inside. In the corridors of the Sandoz laboratory, the quiet contemplation now pervaded the air. They had obtained a new compound, the substance of perplexing power, yet with no apparent commercial application. When a chemical allows you to see gods or witches in your neighbor's face, what indeed should one do with it? They named it, delicate, and with characteristics with caution, began distributing free samples to select psychiatric institutions and researchers. Accompanying literature proposed two applications. First, psychiatrists could ingest it themselves to experience the perceptual world of schizophrenia patients for hours. Second, it could be used in psychotherapy to bring repressed subconscious content to the surface. It was not marketed as a drug, but as an exploratory tool released into the world. like handing a strange key to scholars studying Lot. The psychiatric community of the 1952s, far from fearing it, but instead embraced it with near-breathless fervor. This era coincided with psychoanalysis' golden age, when Freud and Jung's theories dominated academia. The unconscious was viewed as a vast, hidden continent within every person, and this chemical substance seemed like a mat for its exploration. Initial theories posited LSD as a psychomimetic agent, capable of simulating states of psychosis. Researchers believed that by inducing controlled, temporary psychotic episodes, they could unlock the mysteries of schizophrenia's mechanism. Yet this theory soon gave way to a grander and more optimistic vision. It was not a key to unlocking madness, but a key to unlocking healing. Therapists discovered that under the drug's influence, the rigid defense mechanisms of self-awareness, those structures burying painful memories, gradually softened and dissolved. Patients could suddenly confront deep-seated trauma with clarity and honesty. This effect might take years or even decades of traditional talk therapy to achieve. It acted like a chemical bulldozer for the mind, clearing away scar tissue from the past in a single intensive session. Once hailed as a miracle drug, regarded as penicillin for the soul, experiments ranged from European clinics to North American research hospitals. Two major schools of thought emerged. Europe championed psychodissolution therapy through multiple low-dose LSD administration, gently dissolving neurotic barriers like a slow-release solvent, while North America embraced the more radical psychedelic therapy, a term first coined in correspondence between two pioneering scholars. Psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond wrote to author Aldous Huxley, who had just ingested ergotamine under his supervision. Osmond wrote, "To taste the essence of hell or heaven, one need only ingest a minute dose of hallucinant." This is literally the manifestation of the psyche. The therapy focuses on a single, extreme experience in a strictly controlled, supportive environment. Patients receive a large dose of the drug. The explicit goal is to induce a mystical or transcendental state. Such profound experiences are capable of completely reshaping personality and worldview. On the vast plains of Saskatchewan, Canada, Osmond achieved miraculous results. His subjects were chronic, hopeless alcoholics who had failed every other treatment. Through a single LSD session, 50% achieved permanent sobriety. They not only regained clarity, but underwent profound personal transformation. They described profound spiritual awakenings, a cosmic connection that dissolved their addiction. One of Osmond's most famous subjects was Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. After taking LSD in 1956, Wilson experienced what he called a state identical to the spiritual awakening that sparked the AA movement. He became convinced LSD could help other addicts achieve spiritual experiences. He became convinced LSD could help other alcoholics achieve spiritual experiences. This became the cornerstone of his 12-step program. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the Common Cautious Drive, Sidney Cohen was conducting independent research at UCLA. He administered the drug to cultural elites, artists, writers, philosophers, and scientists, rather than psychiatric patients, to explore its effects on creativity and consciousness. It was Cohen who guided Aldous Huxley through his first psychedelic experience. Huxley documented this journey in detail within his groundbreaking work, The Doors of Perception, published in 1954. This book introduced the world of psychedelics to the educated mainstream public for the first time. It portrayed the experience as an ascent to a higher level of reality, rather than a descent into madness, a purification of the mind's perceptual filters. Suddenly, this obscure research chemical became an object of intense intellectual curiosity within the celebrity-obsessed culture of Southern California. It evolved into a symbol of identity. Actor Gary Grant underwent over 100 LSD sessions with his therapist, claiming the drug saved him, helping him confront childhood trauma, and ultimately achieve inner peace. As its most public advocate, he declared to magazines that he had been reborn. This peculiar chapter in LSD's history has been forgotten by the world. Before the rise of Haight-Ashbury, before Timothy Leary issued his call to a generation to tune in, turn on, drop out, LSD was a serious, legitimate tool within the establishment. It was explored in academic halls, administered in hospitals, and discussed in the most revered intellectual circles. Between 1950 and 1965, over 1,000 scientific papers were published. Approximately 40,000 patients underwent psychedelic therapy, from depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder to schizophrenia, even existential anxieties of terminal cancer patients. During this fleeting decade of brilliance, Albert Hofmann's serendipitous discovery seemed poised to revolutionize humanity's understanding of the psyche. It was once a miracle cure, the key to unlocking consciousness. Yet precisely this key, this power to dissolve the self and reshape reality, began attracting a wholly different crowd, uninterested in healing the mind, but bent on destroying the spirit. While therapists in California's sunlit clinics explored LSD's consciousness-expanding properties, Washington, D. was shrouded in glacial, profound doubt. The world had fractured. The Iron Curtain stretched across Europe, drawing a stark line between the irreconcilable ideologies. The Soviet Union possessed nuclear weapons. China fell under communist rule. The Cold War was not a contest of armies and battlefields, but of ideologies, of subversion and covert struck a lay shadow war. This was a war for humanity's future. At its core lay a chilling new dread, a war for the sovereignty of minds. The spark that ignited the flames did not come from European capitals, but from the war-torn Korean peninsula. A disturbing phenomenon was quietly spreading when some prisoners of war were released or repatriated. They were no longer the men they had been when captured. They had become hollow and compliant. They calmly confessed to fabricated war crimes before cameras, accusing the United States of waging biological warfare. They signed petitions, broadcast praises for the captives and condemnations of American imperialism. The most shocking case involved Marine Corps pilot Colonel Frank Swear. After months of interrogation, this decorated officer signed a 60-page detailed confession, admitting to dropping biological bombs. The American public was stunned. The military was disgraced. These battle-hardened soldiers, these American heroes, how could they become traitors? A new term entered the American lexicon, precisely capturing this covert and insidious threat: brainwashing, coined by journalist Edward Hunter, who also happened to be a CIA propagandist. He translated the Chinese term, literally meaning brainwashing. The term carried explosive power. It outlined a chillingly precise psychological technique, a communist secret, unescapable of systematically dismantling personal belief, erasing identity, and implanting new consciousness. Media disseminated it, like programming machines. Sensational reports and films depicted U.S. Special forces subjected to mysterious drugs, hypnosis and relentless psychological torment, until free will evaporated entirely. This demonic image of brainwashing became the central figure in the Cold War nightmare. Within the fledgling Central Intelligence Agency, it was not dismissed as hysteria, but viewed as existential threat. Then-CIA Director Alan Dulles, an aristocratic pipe-smoky master spy, a senior official in the Office of Strategic Services during WWII. He was not easily shaken. Yet the situation on the Korean peninsula deeply unsettled him. He had witnessed Soviet show trials firsthand. In the 1932's loyal old Bolsheviks rising to their feet and confessing They had been traitors and spies for foreign powers their entire lives. Now he saw the same pattern replaying itself in American soldiers. For Dulles and his colleagues, the conclusion was both inescapable and chilling. Communists possessed a secret weapon, a mind-control technology capable of turning anyone into a puppet. America had no countermeasure. The logic that followed was cold and brutal, yet entirely rational in the eyes of national security decision-makers at the time. If the enemy wields a weapon, you let two imperatives emerge. First, develop defenses. Second, create a superior version of the weapon for our own use. The quest for mind-control substances became one of the CIA's most secret and urgent missions. The agency launched a vast covert research program, sparing no expense to explore every avenue. They funded studies in hypnosis, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and mysterious poisons. Globally, they scoured indigenous tribes for exotic plants and folk remedies used to induce trance states. They sought a chemical that could unlock human secrets, a truth serum. But their ambition reached further. They craved substances capable of shattering willpower, dissolving self-awareness, rendering subjects pliable and controllable. Blank canvases ready for identity reshaping. Ultimately, their search led to Basel, Switzerland. Intelligence circles began circulating reports about dolichoxide. This experimental compound from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals was described in scientific papers as possessing almost unbelievable potency. Administered in minute doses, odorless and tasteless, it could be administered without the subject's knowledge, inducing a state of profound psychological disorientation, dissolving self-awareness, blurring the boundaries between reality and hallucination, plunging individuals into a state of extreme vulnerability and suggestibility. For therapists in the clinic, it was a healing tool to access the deepest truths of the self. For Alan Dulles, the CIA's security analyst, it was the perfect weapon. The universal key they had long sought had finally appeared. This miracle of psychiatry was about to be weaponized. The quest for enlightenment was about to turn toward profoundly dark realms. A secret war for control over the human mind, of unprecedented scale, and moral depravity was about to begin. The project was soon codenamed MK Ultra. In the quiet corridors of the CIA, a new kind of war was brewing, not for territory, but for the realm of the mind. And this war required a special weapons master. 1951, such a contradictory figure emerged. His birth name was Joseph Sheed. He later changed it to Sidney Gottlieb. This brilliant chemist, holding a Ph.D. from Caltech, walked with a limp due to congenital clubfoot, and spoke with a stubborn stutter. These insecurities may have fueled the fiery ambition deep within him. To superficial observers, he appeared a gentle, leisurely soul, dwelling on a rural Virginia farm, studying folk dance, cultivating organic vegetables, and drinking raw milk from his own goats, a peculiar regimen that nearly killed him several times. Yet within the CIA's covert realm, he held another identity, known as the Black Wizard. Director Alan Dulles entrusted Gott with a near-mythical mission. This man, who viewed the Cold War as an absolute moral contest, yet employed every immoral means to achieve power, harbored the fanatical paranoia of his era, rooted in rumors of forced confessions among American POWs during the Korean War. He sought the key to unlock and rewrite human consciousness. Dulles craved more than truth serum. He yearned for power far beyond such a tool. He sought substances that could erase captured agent memories entirely, drugs that could discredit from leaders by inducing public behavioral breakdowns, chemicals that could induce dependency, program assassins, or directly obliterate minds. This was the holy grail of espionage, the pursuit of absolute control. To achieve this goal, Dulles granted Gottlieb a letter of authorization with terrifying scope. In April 1953, Project MK Ultra was born. The project's secrecy was so profound, even within the CIA, few were privy to its existence. Gottlieb received a $300,000 budget. By today's standards, this sum seems insignificant, but at the time, it was a fortune. More crucially, he was exempted from all standard government, contracting and accounting procedures, and granted written authorization to conduct experiments on unsuspecting American citizens. The memorandum granted him absolute freedom as long as it didn't kill people. Any means, any substance, any method could be explored. This rule would later be flexibly applied in tragic ways. Gott became the CIA's alchemist, the helmsman of the Technical Services Division, a branch born of nightmares. He not only hunted existing drugs, but dedicated himself to weaponizing them. His team synthesized botulinum toxin, hid lethal agents in pens and cigars, and developed specialized biological agents for political assassinations. He traveled the world under a series of unremarkable aliases, a silent man in perpetually rumpled suits, shuttling between CIA overseas stations and foreign contact, relentlessly pursuing new targets. He sought hallucinogenic mushrooms from Mexican shamans, procured strychnine and datura through clandestine channels, and studied ancient poisons from the Amazon basin. He built an extensive pharmacology arsenal. Yet one compound stood out above all others. From the very beginning, this substance held such strange and profound power. It seemed capable of fulfilling every CIA desire. 25-dialhamid of Lou-Greasy sea acid, LSD. As a scientist, Gottlieb saw in its molecular structure not a key to spiritual enlightenment, but a tool of immense strategic value. He theorized the drug could induce controlled, temporary psychosis. It could dismantle self-awareness, that stubborn fortress of individual will, leaving the mind exposed and vulnerable, ready for interrogation, manipulation, or complete reshaping. Such was his hypothesis. And that stuttering, taciturn farmer, Sidney Gottlieb, was about to unleash a wave of validation, spreading like a chemical contagion into the darkest corners of American society. When initially testing the drug on colleagues within the agency, he administered it with near-minus antisocial casualness, without warning. Spiking morning coffee with the agent became a recurring horror joke among chemists in technical services. But Gottlieb knew, to truly understand this weapon, he required a far larger, more diverse test group. He needed to move the lab to the streets, the agency's choice for street experiments. In many ways, he stood in stark contrast to Sidney Gottlieb. George Hunter White was no scientist. He was a rugged, hard-drinking mountain of a federal narcotics agent, a veteran of the Strategic Services Office during WWII. White navigated the criminal underworld with ease, exuding an arrogant confidence. Where Gottlieb, he was deep and secretive. White was loud and brash. He was particularly drawn to the grimy aspects of the job, perhaps excessively so. In 1953, Dr. T.L. brought White into Operation LER and assigned him the project's most notorious dirty task. The agency would fund a network of safe houses. But these outposts weren't for interrogating spies or sheltering defectors. They were observation posts, laboratories disguised as living rooms and bedrooms. The primary experiment involved secretly administering LSD to unsuspecting American men. The project bore a name steeped in the melodramatic flair of pulp fiction of the era, Operation Midnight Climax. The first safe house was established at 81 Bedford Street in New York's Greenwich Village. This from-story walk-up apartment building set in a neighborhood teeming with artists, bohemians, and clandestine hideouts. Later, more complex and notorious operations unfolded in San Francisco, at a luxury apartment at 295 Walnut Street on Telegraph Hill, overlooking the entire bay. The IA leased the property through a front company and lavishly remodeled it to serve its sinister purposes. George White, a man with a flair for theatrical effect, personally designed the interior. The style deliberately mimicked the exaggerated trappings of a French brothel. Toulouse-Lautrec prints adorn the walls. Satin drapes cascaded down. Photographs of dancers struck provocative poses. These decorations aimed to create a subtle illusion. When the drugs took effect, they amplified the subject's sense of unreality. At the core of the design lay not in the art or furnishings. The true focal point was the 2-way mirror. In the concealed observation room behind it, CIA agents waited with notebooks and hissing tape recorders. The room featured a private bathroom and wet bar, enabling observers to maintain their posts for hours on end, silently witnessing the chemically induced psychodrama unfolding mere steps away. The operation's logistics were oddly efficient. The CIA hired prostitutes and placed them on the federal payroll. These women served as bait. They were dispatched to bars to scout targets. Sailors on shore leave, businessmen on trips, tourists, anyone unlikely to have influential connections or a motive to report the incident was fair game. They used companionship over drinks as law, steering targets to the apartment. Once inside, the woman would signal the agents behind the mirror, usually with subtle gestures or code word. Agents then observed her mixing whiskey or cocktails as she nonchalantly dripped a clear, odorless liquid from a small vial. Dosage was entirely experimental, sometimes just 50 micrograms, other times a lethal overdose. Test subject John Moore remained completely unaware that this evening would take a bizarre turn. Agents observed through glass and took meticulous notes. George White, a frequent presence at San Francisco operations, always held his glass in the dark, jotting observations into his diary. His end resortedly blended clinical detachment with crude commentary, as LSD began distorting subjects' perceptions of time, space, and self. He recorded their reactions. The agents sought not spiritual enlightenment, but to probe human frailties. They observed whether subject would lose self-control, or become incoherent, but most eagerly anticipated them revealing secrets. They wanted to know if with acid dissolving self-awareness, they would confess extramarital affairs, criminal acts, or their deepest fears. From a wise perspective, the results proved profoundly disappointing. Subjects rarely disclosed intelligence, worthy information. Instead, they often descended into extreme paranoia, convinced the CIA was reading their minds. This paranoia was, ironically, entirely rational. Some would stay mesmerized at their own hands for an entire hour. Others would panic at shifting wallpaper patterns, or the sudden appearance of demonic alien features on a prostitute's face. Others sink into blank despair. The collected data consists entirely of chaotic records of psychological anguish, rather than carefully extracted classified text. The project declared failure in developing effective interrogation techniques. Yet from the early 1950 seconds to the mid-1960 seconds, the lights at 225 Chestnut Street and 81 Bedford Street remained on for over a decade. The CIA continued funding the project to cover rent, prostitute fees, and George White's lavish expense account, which detailed alcohol, recording equipment, and infiltration tools. The entire operation stood as a surreal satire on American life, dripping with bone-chilling irony. The nation's premier intelligence agency, tasked with countering the atheistic communist threat, operated a government-funded brothel on American soil. It drugged its own citizens without consent, trampling every civil liberty it swore to defend. George White himself seemed acutely aware of the absurdity. At the end of the day, he later wrote with dark self-mockery, "I'm just an insignificant preacher, not a preacher, but a sinner, at least trying to walk the straight and narrow. Yet this path led to a long descent into moral abyss. Those innocent men stumbling out of apartments, lost in the chaotic night, were merely the first sacrifices. They were but the tip of a human experimentation iceberg, so vast and cold, its full scale would only be revealed decades later. Brothels in New York and San Francisco, with all their absurd spectacles, were merely an insignificant corner of Sidney Gottlieb's vast empire of involuntary research. Operation Midnight Climax was but one of 149 independent sub-projects under the MK-Ultra program. Gottlieb's pursuit of mind-control weapons extended far beyond a few apartments. From prisons to psychiatric hospitals, he had infiltrated the nation's most secure and most vulnerable institutions. He has built a nationwide secret network, composed of researchers from top universities and hospitals, psychologists, chemists, and physicians who willingly conduct high-risk experiments on humans. Under the generous, unaccountable funding provided by CIA-front organizations like the Society for Human Ecology Research, the selection criteria for these subjects, they were forgotten prisoners, perfect human test subject. The Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, stands as one of the most chilling research facilities. This federal prison primarily held drug offenders. Here the CIA, through Researcher Harris's conducted a series of brutal LSD studies on incarcerated African-American prisoners. This arrangement epitomized cold exploitation. Researchers recruited volunteers by offering drugs as bait. Consenting participants received injections of high-purity heroin or morphine for inmates struggling with addiction. This amounted to a cruel bargain. In one infamous experiment, 7 subjects were continuously administered LSD for 77 days. For over 2 months, they consumed doses 3 times the typical recreational amount. The experiment aimed to determine whether the drug could induce mental breakdown, permanent disorientation, or dependency. Subjects endured terrifying hallucinations, psychotic episodes, and severe psychological distress, all meticulously documented in Drive. Isbell's research notes, later transferred to the CIA's funding agency. Lexington prisoners were ideal test subjects, as their reality was already confined by iron bars and guards. Even if they protested, their voices would only echo within the prison walls, before fading into nothingness. The quest to find vulnerable minds extended the reach of Project MK-Ultra northward, across the Canadian border, to the Allen Memorial Institute at McGill University in Montreal. There, the esteemed psychiatrist Ewan Cameron pioneered a series of radical and brutal techniques known as psychodriving and demodeling. Dr. Cameron firmly believed that by completely erasing a patient's existing personality and rebuilding a new one from scratch, he could cure all manner of mental illnesses, from schizophrenia to anxiety disorders. With covert funding from the CIA, he transformed his theories into horrifying reality. Many patients admitted for mild conditions like postpartum depression or anxiety were subjected to unimaginable torment. They were drugged into comas lasting weeks or even months, and subjected to electroshock therapy at doses 30 to 40 times higher than standard protocols. While in this helpless, sedated state, they were injected with massive doses of psychoactive drugs like LSD. Simultaneously, speakers placed under their pillows played simple repetitive commands or random noise in a continuous loop. The objective was to shatter their memories, their sense of self, and indeed their entire mental world. The results were catastrophic. Hundreds of patients left the Allen Memorial Institute as walking corpses. Memory loss, intellectual decline, degeneration to near-infantile states, unable to recognize their own families. Dr. Cameron's work was not about treatment, but a psychological destruction project funded and driven by Sidney Gottlieb. This brutal addict viewed it as a potential blueprint for breaking enemy agents and prisoners. Yet the scope of the experiment extended far beyond prisoners and patients. To explore LSD's effects, Gottlieb insisted on testing it on his own personnel. Abusor and reckless, surprise dosing, spread among collaborators in Allen Institute Technical Services and the Army Chemical Warfare Division. Agents slipped LSD into each other's drinks, at office gatherings or morning briefings, treating the drug-induced deep psychic disarray as a prank, seen as a rite of manhood, a way to prove mastery over professional tools. Most victims returned to their desks shaken and paranoia before returning to their desks in a state of shock. But in the fall of 1953, this casual cruelty would finally yield fatal consequences. At the heart of this tragedy was Frank Olson. He was neither a spy or a seasoned operative, but a brilliant 43-year sole bacteriologist at the Army Special Warfare Center in Fort Detrick, Maryland. The base was a top-secret facility conducting biological warfare research. Olson was a man of principle, a devoted husband and father of 3 children. He was beginning to harbor profound moral doubts about the nature of his work. In November 1953, Olson and several colleagues from Fort Detrick, along with high-ranking CIA officials, including Sidney Gottschall and his deputy Robert Rushbrook, to a secluded cabin by Deep Creek in rural Maryland for a research symposium. During the 3-day meeting, they discussed multiple top-secret joint projects. The following evening, without warning or consent, Gottatello decided to conduct another unofficial experiment. After dinner, as the groups are chatting, Gottatello discreetly placed a bottle of French liqueur laced with LSD on the table. Queen Terror. He watched silently as several individuals, including Frank Olson, poured and drank the liquor. For most, the effects were manageable, but Olson's reaction was entirely different. He experienced neither euphoria nor enlightenment. The drug seemed to unlock a deep well of anxiety and paranoia within him. He became taciturn, withdrawing into himself and descending into profound mental disarray. The world that had seemed orderly mere hours before now felt fraught with menace and turmoil. In the days that followed, his condition deteriorated relentlessly. He tendered his resignation to his superiors, declaring he had committed fatal errors in both his life and career. Guilt and terror consumed him entirely. The CIA recognized the gravity of the situation, though their concern was not for Olson's health, but for the classified information he possessed. They feared he might become a security risk. Instead of providing professional medical assistance, they opted for internal handling. Robert Rushbrook escorted him to New York City for a psychiatric evaluation by a doctor also employed by the CIA. This journey intensified Olson's paranoid delusions. He felt intensely that he was being watched, his mind permanently scarred. On the night of November 27, Olson and Rushbrook checked into the Stettler Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, assigned to room 1018A. Around 2:30 a.m. the following morning, an incident occurred within the room. The hotel night manager received a frantic call from Rushbrook, reporting his roommate had fallen from the window on 7th Avenue sidewalk. Frank Olson's body lay shattered. He had fallen from the 10th floor, shattering a locked, closed window. The official explanation offered to the grieving family and media was succinct. Frank Olson had committed suicide following a severe mental breakdown. For 20-2 years, his family clung to this lie. The word LSD was never mentioned. The truth only surfaced in the 1970 seconds with the Rockefeller Commission's investigative report. The commission was investigating CIA abuses at the time. The CIA was forced to admit administering drugs to Olson 9 days before his death. But this confession only deepened the mystery. Was this a tragic suicide induced by drug-induced psychosis, or did it conceal a more sinister plot? was Olson, in his heightened state of agitation, threatening to expose Project TY, the program's darkest secrets, not only concerning MK Ultra, but also his involvement in the biological weapons project at Fort Detrick. Did the man accompanying M. Rushbrook deem this emotionally unstable bacteriologist an unacceptable liability to the agency? Was he pushed? The truth remains forever unknown. The sole eyewitness, Robert Rushbrook, gave a statement riddled with inconsistencies. Frank Olson's death became the program's first officially acknowledged fatality. Amidst the vast, nameless graveyard of MK Ultra victims, only one stark headstone stands. In that moment, the abstract controlled desires of the Black Magicians collided violently with the fragile, unpredictable, and ultimately tragic reality of a single human life. While the men in grey at Langley and Fort Detrick busied themselves weaponizing consciousness, their subjects were quietly changing hands. Secrets cannot be studied without being shared, and a substance capable of dissolving its own structure will inevitably develop a will of its own. The laboratory doors were locked tight, but the thoughts imprisoned within Worth are more powerful. As the saying goes, the genie in the bottle had begun to stir. Perceiving the base nature of the outside world, its first true escape came not through explosion, but through a silent dialogue, over tea shared in a modest California home. On a sunny afternoon in May 1953, amidst the Hollywood Hills, this meeting unfolded, hosted by the renowned British author Aldous Huxley, whose intellectual sanctuary had long gathered philosophy and esoteric thought. The visitor was British psychiatrist Drive Humphrey Osmond. This pioneer, practicing in Saskatchewan, Canada, pioneered the use of hallucinogens to treat alcohol dependence. Osmond brought a gift, a small dose of crystalline mescaline, the active alkaloid found in the peyote cactus. Huxley, author of Brave New World, whose novel fought older society, tamed by state-controlled drugs, now voluntarily explored a substance promising not subjugation, but liberation. He swallowed the capsule and waited. What followed was not the garish hallucinations of popular culture. He saw no dragons, nor whirlpools. The world simply revealed itself fully. Seated in his study, he gazed at the bouquet in the vase. They were no longer mere flowers, but the vision Adam beheld on the morning of creation. The miracle of bare existence flowed through every moment. The folds of his trousers became boundless cosmos, the rhythm of light and shadow deep as Baruch's masterpiece. Time suddenly slowed to the pace of geological eras. That ceaseless self, the incessant narrator in his mind, finally fell silent. He no longer experienced the world as an observer, but transformed into a participant, merging with reality's existential essence. This tranquil, intellectual and profound spiritual experience formed the bedrock of his slim, yet world-shaking work The Doors of Perception, published the following year. Its title, borrowed from the poet William Blake, became a spiritual beacon for a generation. This book achieved what CIA internal reports could never attain. It endowed psychedelic experience with a lexicon, a philosophical core, and dignified status. It redefined psychedelic experience neither an interrogation tool, nor a symptom of mental disorder, but an effective pathway to spiritual inquiry, an unexpected grace in an increasingly bleak and materialistic world. Huxley's rigorous and eloquent prose served as the key to unlock the door, liberating psychedelic substances from the realms of medicine and espionage into the hands of artists, thinkers, and explorers. Yet an idea, even an exceptional one, requires a network for dissemination, and missionaries to spread it. When Huxley offered sacred texts, this substance found its most potent and enigmatic apostle in a man named L. Ron Hubbard, known as Captain Hubbard. Though this title was honorific, his past was shrouded in rumors and contradictory legends. Reportedly a strategic intelligence service officer during WWII, a bootlegger, a brilliant physicist, a uranium-mining millionaire, whatever his origins. By the 1952, Hubbard had become a portly, cheerful man, possessed of an unshakable conviction. LSD was to him a sacrament, a tool for humanity's salvation, and its dissemination his life's mission. He was the sower of LSD seeds. Hubbard's dissemination strategy was exemplary. He never peddled on street corners. Instead, he curated enlightenment for the elite, leveraging vast wealth and connections. He secured a legal, permanent license from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals to procure LSD-25 for his research. His laboratory was wherever he went. His leather doctor's bag was always packed, containing pharmaceutical-grade LSD, psilocybin, undergatamine. His strategy was simple yet lethal: target the apex of the pyramid. He firmly believed if one could alter the minds of those who rule the world itself would transform. He introduced LSD into executive boardrooms, priests' regoys, politicians' private meetings. He guided vice presidents of Bill Howell, members of the Vancouver Catholic Church, and countless other influential figures. His guidance process was serene and controlled, often accompanied by lavish ceremonial elements, a stark contrast to the CIA's cold, clinical settings. He frequently accompanied subjects with the benevolent demeanor of a grandfather, gently guiding them to dissolve their self-minded consciousness. It is said he personally led 6,000 people through their first psychedelic journey. He quietly built a secret network of awakened individuals. The initiation rite for the secret society was merely a few hundred micrograms of hallucinogenic chemicals, while the CIA sought to tame the devil into a state tool. Ron Hubbard corked and uncorked bottles within the halls of power, letting psychedelic vapors seep into the system's foundations. This silent collaboration between thinker and evangelist ensured that by the dawn of the 1960s, LSD was no longer merely a chemical compound. It had become an ideology, a promise, a transcendent rumor, awaiting the birth of a new kind of prophet, not from the world of spies or financial titans, but born in the sacred halls of academia. At Harvard University, there was a charismatic, ambitious, and profoundly subversive psychology lecturer. His name was Timothy Leary. Summer 1960. Before becoming a household name, Lilly was vacationing in Cuernavaca, Mexico. A local anthropologist introduced him to a secret formula, passed down through generations of indigenous people: psilocybin mushrooms. The so called magic mushrooms. Sitting by the pool, Lilly ingested the fungus. This experience utterly transformed him. He later wrote, in those brief 5 hours, his understanding of the human psyche surpassed the sum total of his 15-year career as a psychologist. He felt he had died and been reborn, witnessing the universe transform into a cellular dance of energy. While the self proved but a fleeting illusion, upon returning to Harvard, he was a changed man. The dull world of behavioral psychology, filled with lab rats and statistical charts, now seemed child's play to him. He was convinced he had found the key to unlocking human potential, and this key grew from the earth. After returning to Cambridge, Massachusetts, he formed a research partnership with his young and passionate colleague, Richard Alpert. In 1960, the two co-founded the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Initially, the research maintained rigorous academic standards. At least on the surface, they sought to study psilocybin's effects on human consciousness through scientifically controlled methods. The most renowned example was the Concord prison experiment, conducted from 1961 to 1963. By administering psilocybin to inmates, they hoped this profound experience would foster empathy and reduce recidivism rates upon release. Preliminary results appeared strikingly positive. Subsequent analysis, however, raised serious doubts about the experimental methodology. Another pivotal study was the Marsh Chapel tasked to experiment also known as the Good Friday experiment. Researchers administered psilocybin to seminary students before a Good Friday service to verify whether the substance could reliably induce authentic religious experiences. Most participants reported profound mystical states, experienced a sense of unity, transcendence, and sacredness, describing it as one of the most significant moments of their lives. However, the boundaries between researchers and subjects, observers and participants began to blur. Lilly and Alpert started taking the drugs alongside their research subjects, abandoning the detached clinical approach and instead engaging in shared exploration. These gatherings gradually moved beyond the realm of experimentation, evolving into psychedelic salons. Allen Ginsberg and other beat poets, along with rotating graduate students and intellectually curious intellectuals gathered there. Rumors began circulating through the Vine-covered campus, chaotic drug parties, undergraduates being drugged, a cult of personality forming around the charismatic Silver-stunned Leary. University authorities grew increasingly alarmed that the project was becoming a source of scandal. Spring 1963, the fuse finally ignited. Richard Alpert was fired for supplying psilocybin to undergraduates, a clear violation of their agreement with the university. Shortly thereafter, Timothy Leary was formally dismissed for absenteeism. In his view, he was occupied with a more vital mission. For Leary, dismissal was not defeat, but liberation, freed from academic constraints. He and Alpert devoted themselves entirely to their new identity as psychedelic pioneers. They secured funding from Peggy Billy and Tommy Hitchcock, young, adventurous heirs to the Mellon fortune. The siblings purchased a sprawling 60-room estate in Millbrook, New York. This domain became the new headquarters, a collective laboratory, and the epicenter of the East Coast psychedelic movement. Millbrook served as both a research center, a spiritual commune, and a perpetual family gathering. Lilly, Alpert, and their core followers dedicated themselves to systematic consciousness exploration using LSD, a drug more potent and readily available. They drafted manifestos and crafted guides for psychedelic journeys, while attempting to establish a new way of life rooted in self-dissolution and expanded consciousness. It was during this period that Leary, having transformed from professor to prophet, began publicly advocating mass psychedelic use. He held press conferences and delivered speeches, whose rhetoric increasingly took on messianic overtones. In 1966, he uttered the three phrases that would become a generation's motto. This maxim would be printed on posters, engraved on badges, and whispered in dorm rooms across America: turn on, tune in, drop out. For Lurie, this maxim was a carefully orchestrated operating manual. Open meant activating the nervous system to delve inward with psychedelics and explore new dimensions of consciousness. Tunes signified harmonizing with the surrounding world and expressing a newly awakened perspective. The most controversial phrase, drop out, did not advocate apathy or withdrawal. He called for a conscious, deliberate, and selective disengagement from the involuntary, unconscious constraints of corporate workplaces, political gamesmanship, and the consumerist rat race. Conscious, deliberate, and selective disengagement. This declaration of seeking inner independence was interpreted by the media and a panicked establishment as a call for social anarchy, as if inciting American youth to abandon responsibility and drown in drug-induced self-indulgence. Former Harvard scholar Timothy Leary was now branded by President Richard Nixon as America's most dangerous man. He released the escaped genie from laboratories and intellectual salons, broadcasting its message across the globe. The magic bottle was shattered beyond repair. On the other side of America, a wilder new chapter was about to unfold, while Timothy Leary presided over affairs at Millbrook's pastoral estate and builds a new psychedelic religion from the top down. The West Coast brews a different energy. Less philosophical speculation, more chaotic. Less intellectual air, more primal wildness. Its driving force is not a professor, but a novelist, a wrestler, a man straddling the beat and hippie movements. His name was Ken Kesey. Having achieved fame with his 1962 bestseller, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Kesey was already a literary superstar. But his most profound experience did not originate at a desk. It unfolded within a hospital in 1959. As a student in Stanford University's creative writing program, Kesey volunteered for a medical study at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital. He received $20 daily compensation for ingesting various psychoactive drugs and documenting their effects. Only later did he learn this study was secretly funded by the CIA as part of Project 10K Ultra. History's great irony lies in the fact that government exploration into mind-control weapons directly spawned one of the counterculture's most influential figures. It was during this government-funded experiment that Ken Kesey first encountered LSD. For him, it was not a quiet spiritual awakening, but a carnival of sensory revelry. Behind the thin veil of shared reality, he glimpsed scenes both absurd and terrifying. He saw not only the light, but craved control over the switch. Kesey soon began procuring LSD independently and sharing it with his bohemian friends in the Perry Alley community near Stanford University. This group of writers, artists, and beautiful misfits formed the core of his legendary team, the Merry Pranksters. Among them, the most famous member was driver Neil Kesey, the living embodiment of the beat spirit, the very inspiration for Dean Moretti and Jack Kerouac on the road. Cassidy was the vibrant bridge, rapid minus fire speech, amphetamine minus fueled bridge. Summer 1964. Kitz and the Pranksters decided to embark on a new American road trip. They purchased a 1939 International Harvester school bus. This bulky antique was transformed into a mobile art installation and recording studio, its body covered in dizzying swirls of primary colors. Complex microphone and speaker systems were installed inside and out. A roof hatch allowed members to climb up and perform, offering music to bewildered residents in towns they passed through. They imbued the bus with deeper meaning. Their destination was the New York World's Fair, but their true goal was far more abstract: to shoot a movie, to live a movie, and to transform all of America into one massive psychedelic stage. Cassidy gripped the steering wheel, fueled by an endless supply of amphetamines and a freezer packed with LSD-laced orange juice. They embarked on a journey destined for the history books. This mobile band of subversives, a breathing work of art, aimed to jolt America awake from its black and white slumber. By the time they returned to California, their mission had evolved. The road trip once traveled for self alone, now sought to be shared with all. Now they yearned to share this experience with everyone. They began hosting a series of parties, but the word party failed to capture the scale of the spectacles they created. They called it the psychedelic experiment. The first was held in November 1965 at Sunnyside Ranch, California. Its concept was to create a complete environment without specific guidance or goals, allowing participants to freely experience LSD, crafting a space for unrestrained play. These pranksters were not mentors like Lily, but masters of ritual, cosmic clowns, meticulously orchestrating a multi-sensory frenzy. The acid test was a centuries-old, a deliberate attempt to short-circuit rational thought, where houses or community halls became dens of tangled wires. Projectors cast chaotic imagery. Liquid light and shadow flooded every surface. Strobe lights flashed at dizzying frequencies. Sound was omnipresent, tapes of bizarre noises, microphones feeding 10-second delayed echoes, and live music. The resident band for these bizarre carnivals is the local group, formerly known as Wizards, now renamed Grateful Dead. Psychedelic drug tests are their crucible. They learn it not to play for passive listeners, but for a crowd whose perception of time, sound, and space is utterly distorted. They must improvise, stretching songs into lengthy exploratory jams, becoming the sonic guides 400s navigating the space. Of course, the core of the night was the psychedelic substance itself. A massive trash bin brimming with electric blue cool minusade, laced with an unknown but potent dose of pure Stanley LSD. Beside it hung a banner. Can you pass the psychedelic test? Here, no disguised healing or spirituality, nor intellectual whispers. LSD became public utility here, catalyzing collective chaos and ecstatic communion. The pranksters unleashed the devil Leary had conjured upon the masses, hosting a deafening carnival feast for it. From CIA black sites, to intellectual silent study rooms, to Harvard lecture halls, to graffiti miners splattered buses crisscrossing the nation. This surgic dial Hamed has completed its journey. Now it has thoroughly, irreversibly, unstatically permeated the cultural fabric, fueling music, art, and the zeitgeist. This generation is poised to collide head-on with the establishment, the very establishment that secretly birthed it all. The stage for cultural civil war is set. Its detonator is this strange, potent and now ubiquitous microchemical. This substance finally escaped the laboratory. It raced out of therapists' offices, through the CIA's surveillance net, and poured into the streets and alleys, like a genie released from a tiny yet potent bottle. By 1966, it found its true home, not in the quiet clinics of Los Angeles, nor the sterile interrogation rooms of some forgotten black site, but in the vibrant, beating heart of the new revolutionary movement. It settled in a small San Francisco neighborhood, called Haight-Ashbury, and began to alter the world's colors and sounds. The air itself seemed thick with infinite possibility, glittering with strange new energy. This drug, once a tool of psychiatrists and spies, is elevated to a sacred right here. It becomes psychedelic. Music is the first manifestation of change, as if in the collective consciousness British musicians, aid or as violently kicked open. Britain, for young men from Liverpool, who built a global music empire with 3-minutes wheat love song, are now undergoing profound transformation. 1965, at a dinner party, the Beatles are introduced to a dentist of old people who slipped LSD into their coffee, giving them their first taste of psychedelics. That experience was chaotic, terrifying yet utterly enlightening. It shattered their perception of reality and simultaneously broke the clean, straightforward structure of their music. With the release of the Revolver album, this shift became undeniable. By their sixth album, Revolver, neatly crafted love songs vanished, replaced by strange and novel sounds. Tomorrow Never Knows became the anthem of this new consciousness. John Lennon's voice, processed through a rotating Leslie speaker, transformed into a distant, intangible oracle. His lyrics were directly lifted from Timothy Leary's psychedelic interpretation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and Book of the Dead. Close your mind, relax, drift away. This is no suggestion. It is an order. The background music weaves, a continuous hum of sitar intertwined with endless hypnotic drum beats. This is not a song to be heard, but a space to inhabit, a simulated psychedelic experience. This music was designed as a vessel for inner exploration. A year later, at the M67 Star Gloucester, they released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This album became the pinnacle of psychedelic aesthetics. The entire record unfolds like an oral carnival, coal-aging slapstick, Indian elements, and studio magic into a kaleidoscopic soundscape. Its most famous track, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, had its title, immediately and accurately deciphered as an oblique nod to hallucinousness. Lyrics painted fantastical scenes of newspaper taxis and lurid ties, carousel men devouring cotton candy pies, pure childlike surrealism. directly transcribing the visions unfolding behind closed eyes under the influence of DMT. The album's structure itself, presented as a seamless performance by a fictional band, shattered the framework of traditional long-play record. This is a holistic experience, an invitation to another world, ultimately becoming the ultimate soundtrack to Summer of Love. Across the Atlantic, another musician was pushing the sonic potential of psychedelic experiences to its limits. His name was Jimi Hendrix. While the Beatles treated the studio as a laboratory, Hendrix used his guitar as a medium. Late 1966, this touring musician from Seattle arrived in London, honing his craft on the black music circuit, but the electric guitar flowing through his consciousness and fingertips had long transcended the realm of mere instrument. It became a conduit for pure energy, a machine for painting with sound. Hendrix's music was a vessel directly translating LSD experiences into noise. He employed feedback, distortion, and warm-walk edits, not as special effects, but as primary hues on his tonal palette. Listening to works like Purple Haze or Have You Ever Tried It is to feel the surging of sensory overload, the dissolution of boundaries, and the synesthetic experience. He sang of kissing the sky. His guitar solos were not structured melodies, but unrestrained explorations of elements, screaming, crying, exploding, with 6 strings and amplifiers cranked to maximum volume. He carved new frontiers in the realms of consciousness. In June 1967, when he took the stage at the Monterey International Pop Festival, this opening performance of the symbolic Summer of Love concluded with him setting his guitar ablaze, a ritualistic sacrifice. This performance art precisely captured the pulse of the era, creation and destruction, beauty and violence, all engulfed in a blazing psychedelic inferno. The message was stark: the old world, its stale rules and sounds, was being burned away, making space for the new. This new aesthetic flowed from the ears to the eyes. The visual art of that era became a mirror of psychedelic consciousness. On concert posters at venues like San Francisco's Fillmore Theater, fonts surged and twisted like molten lava, merely illegible. Letters contorted and deformed like living creatures. Colors pulsed with fluorescent clashes, aiming to mimic the sensory intensification of psychedelic. Artist Peter Max became a superstar in this realm. His cosmic art had on everything from posters to bed sheets. His works joyfully depicted serene figures gazing at the stars with bold lines and vibrant colors, floating in dreamlike realms across the sky. This art was both optimistic and spiritual, yet highly commercial. It captured the utopian spirit of counterculture and packaged it as mass-market consumer goods. Art, music, fashion, all elements merged into a unified aesthetic. This is a culture proclaiming the evolution of self-awareness. Long hair, flowing robes, beaded jewelry, paisley patterns. This attire signifies rebellion against the bleak, conformist world of their parents' generation, declaring allegiance to a new, vibrant inner realm, as heralded by prophets like the poet Leary. LSD's promise was not merely entertainment, but revolution, a weapon to dismantle the self, piercing through society, government, military, corporate false constructs, to reach deeper, more authentic, more universal truths. Taking psychedelics meant exiting the system. It was a political declaration, a declaration of independence from a sick society that waged brutal war in Vietnam, while demanding strict adherence to dogma at home. 1967 Summer of Love. Over 100,000 youth flooded Haight-Ashbury, seeking to build a new world and collective consciousness. In a brief, dazzling moment, a chemical compound accidentally discovered in a Swiss lab seemed poised to transform the world. Yet such blazing light cannot endure. The shadows it cast were oft unterrifyingly deep, as the children who hated Haight-Ashbury wove flowers into their hair. The outside world watched with eyes filled with confusion, infatuation, and deepening dread. Beyond the psychedelic bubble, the utopian dream, vividly real within the hallucinatory experience, took on the hues of a dangerous nightmare in the eyes of mainstream America. Media initially framed the hippie phenomenon as quirky human interest stories, but now began shifting their narrative. The focus shifted from peaceful flower children to delusional, drug-addicted dropouts. Newspapers and television overflowed with sensationalist reports. Those nightmarish psychedelic experiences brought no enlightenment. Instead, they led to mental breakdowns. Urban legends spread like wildfire. Someone stared at the sun after taking LSD and went blind, convinced they were gazing upon God's face. Students delusional from psychedelics imagined they could fly, leaping from high buildings to their deaths. The most devastating was the 1916 suicide of Diane Linklater, daughter of Art Linklater. Linklater, a renowned television host and symbol of wholesome family values, immediately publicly blamed LSD for his daughter's death, claiming she had suffered a malignant hallucination, despite subsequent autopsies finding no drug residue in her system. The story took root in the public consciousness. It provided a tragic, human face for the escalating moral panic. A relatable victim. Media narratives painted horrifying pictures. LSD wasn't merely a drug, but a chemical capable of inducing permanent insanity. It would damage chromosomes and cause congenital defects in offspring. It would trigger latent mental illnesses and open unclosable gates deep within the psyche. While some fears had factual basis, the drug could indeed induce psychotic breakdowns in susceptible individuals. Yet media coverage was saturated with hysterical alarmism, completely divorced from the nuances of ongoing scientific research. Governments, growing increasingly anxious, monitored the drug spread, finally spotting an opportunity for action. The psychedelic counterculture movement, characterized by anti-war protests and outright rejection of American materialism, had long been viewed as a threat to social order, and the drugs fueling this culture naturally became the easiest targets to strike. Legislating to ban a chemical compound proved far simpler than addressing the deep-seated sociopolitical anxieties driving young people to drugs. This counter-offensive first surged at the state level. California, the epicenter of the movement, led the charge by classifying LSD as an illegal substance. Other states swiftly followed suit, but the true objective was achieving a federal ban. Political rhetoric intensified accordingly. Politicians declared drug abuse a plague, corrupting the nation's youth, destroying its moral foundations, threatening the nation's very existence. Their assessment of the scale of use was not entirely without merit. By 1967, millions of doses of LSD were in circulation, yet within their purely pathologized framework, they entirely excluded the possibility that users might be seeking spiritual enlightenment or authentic personal growth. They were simply outcasts and victims of a dangerous new plague. In Washington, D.C., legislators convened hearings, where alarmed parents and so-called medical experts took the stand to paint the bleakest picture of drug harm. The few researchers attempting to offer balanced perspectives, those mentioning drugs' potential therapeutic benefits in controlled settings, were drowned out by gasps. An unstoppable tide had formed. The complex nature of psychedelic experiences was reduced to terrifying caricatures. Touch this box, and you'll go mad. 1968, the legislative hammer finally fell. As part of the SCANDALOUS, a comprehensive legislative package, this legislation, formally titled the Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act Amendments, made possession of LSD a felony, a significant escalation from previous laws targeting only manufacturing and distribution. Now, the user themselves became the criminal. President Lyndon B. Johnson a leader already mired in unpopular wars and social upheaval, signed the bill into law. That same year, the federal government formally halted all approved research into LSD's therapeutic potential. The door slammed shut. The substance was classified as a Schedule, like controlled substance. Drugs posing a high risk of abuse with no accepted medical use. It now shared the legal taboo status of heroin. LSD's journey from a promising psychiatric tool to a countercultural icon was ultimately branded a public menace by officials. The summer of love drew to a close, replaced by an autumn of arrest and a long winter of prohibition. A substance meant to liberate the mind now had the power to imprison the body. This irony was felt by all, especially those forced into shadow exile, who pursued spiritual exploration as fugitives. As this public spectacle unfolded, within the gray, ice-walled corridors of Langley, Virginia, another quiet story reached its conclusion. While the public was told LSD was a terrifying mind-distorting weapon, the CIA reached the opposite conclusion. For them, the problem with LSD was not that it was too potent, but that it was fundamentally ineffective, at least for their purposes. The grand ambition of Project MK, ULTRA, to find the key to unlocking and manipulating the human mind, clashed violently with the chaotic, unpredictable, and intensely personal nature of psychedelic experiences. This program, launched in the early 1950s, with such high hopes, ultimately ended in a chaotic and profoundly disappointing conclusion. 2 decades, millions of dollars. They pursued nothing but a phantom. Agents, unsuspecting civilians, prisoners, the mentally ill, all were forcibly drugged. Thousands of experiments, all for one simple goal: to find a reliable means of compelling people to act against their will. They craved a truth serum, a potion. They craved a disabling agent that could render enemies incapacitated. Their most audacious dream was to synthesize a compound capable of reshaping human nature, creating a real minus life. Man Yuri and candidate. Such individuals, triggered to execute assassinations, would suffer complete memory loss. LSD, with its profound psychological effects, was once considered the most promising candidate drug, but the outcome was disastrous. Even that description is generous. This drug defied all expectations. Not only did it fail to make subject susceptible to suggestion, it often produced the exact opposite effect. Some subjects descended into extreme paranoia, convinced their interrogators were demons or monsters, cocooning themselves in absolute silence, sealing secrets tighter than ever. Others, overwhelmed by the absurdity of the situation, broke into uncontrollable laughter. More subjects became verbose, but what poured forth was not classified intelligence, rather a meaningless torrent of free association. Childhood memories, cosmic philosophies in the melted patterns on ceiling tiles, tangled together in chaos. Interrogators trying to extract troop movements, often only 10-minute monologues on the interdecadence of all things, followed by tearful confessions about stealing a bicycle in 3rd grade. CIA researchers gradually came to a painful realization: the core lay in the absolute subjectivity of the experience. This drug did not impose a new reality, but shattered the existing one, forcing users to construct a new world, using their own psychological material, memories, fears and hopes. The outcome depended entirely on what psychologists call state of mind and environment, the individual's mental state and surroundings during administration. Agents attempting hostile interrogations created the worst possible environment. The inherent fear and paranoia of such situations inevitably amplified the drug's negative effect, leading to terrifying, nightmarish journeys. This experience could not be standardized, nor could specific outcomes be guaranteed. For every subject who might become compliant, 10 descended into hysterics, rigid states, or become utterly lost within their own mental universes. The dream of mind, minus control weapons dissolved into a pool of psychedelics line. In their pursuit of the perfect truth serum, intelligence agencies instead discovered the perfect catalyst for chaos. Far from unlocking secrets, this substance completely warped the shape of the keyhole. By the late 1960s, the tide had turned. Internal memos from the Technical Services Department grew increasingly pessimistic. The program yielded neither actionable intelligence, nor escaped becoming a logistical unethical nightmare. As rumors of drug abuse spread through the counterculture movement, the project's exposure risk skyrocketed. What if journalists links and Francisco hippies to experiments at a secret base just miles away? The potential fallout from such a catastrophic scandal was immense. Scientists who had once fervently believed in the project quietly shifted to more conventional intelligence work. Funding began to dry up. This initiative, once considered the cutting edge of Cold War espionage technology, now appeared foolish and embarrassing. It had reached a complete dead end. In 1973, Project MK was finally quietly terminated. The political climate in Washington had undergone a dramatic shift. The Watergate scandal was causing a major uproar. A wave of skepticism began sweeping through the intelligence community. The Senate Select Committee, led by Senator Frank Church, the Church Committee, was investigating abuses of power by the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI. Richard Helms, then director of the CIA, had served the agency since its inception. He knew its darkest secrets, including MK Ultra. Helms sensed the impending storm. He knew the MK Ultra files documenting profoundly unethical human experiments were a ticking time bomb beneath their dry bureaucratic descriptions. If these documents were made public, the consequences would be unimaginable. To execute preemptive damage control, he issued a simple, chilling order to destroy the files. The vast majority of documents chronicling to decades of mind control research, experiment logs, financial records, human test reports, were collected, shredded in office shredders, and incinerated. This was an attempt to erase a chapter of history, to pretend this grotesque exploration of controlling the human soul had never occurred. The program was officially terminated. There was no grand ceremony, no final report declaring success or failure. It simply faded away. This grand journey to manipulate minds did not end with a thunderous conclusion. Instead, it faded amidst the low hum of office shredders. This silent admission, revealed after exhausting funds, exhausting efforts, and sacrificing countless lives, they had gained nothing. The mind, it turned out, was not a lock to be picked, but a universe unto itself. LSD was not the key, but rather another mirror, reflecting the vastness of this universe and its profound mystery. 1974, a bitter wind howled through Manhattan's canyons, sweeping up the front page of the New York Times, where investigative journalist Seymour Hersh's report stood out starkly. The headline seemed mundane, but its contents ignited like a match tossed into dry kindling, instantly setting the entire warehouse ablaze. The report made an unsettling lie certain accusation Central Intelligence Agency, an agency explicitly prohibited from operating within U.S. borders, had conducted large minor-scale illegal domestic surveillance against the anti-war movement and other dissident groups. The public, already weary from the slow bleeding of the Watergate scandal, cynicism, was now jolted awake by the morning coffee. This report did not merely expose the truth, but validated the darkest rumors and most paranoid fears. The watchman seemed not to be guarding the city walls, but peering into our windows, in the halls of Congress. This was no longer merely a scandal, but an institutional crisis. The post-war consensus, the tacit understanding that intelligence agencies must enjoy freedom of action to combat the Cold War, was crumbling. The beast in the basement, the one no one dared mention, was now rattling its chains, making a deafening noise. Thus, in early 1975, the United States Senate established a special committee, formally named the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Activities, a name so long it takes your breath away. This bureaucratic, dry title foreshadowed the investigation to come would become the most profound public scrutiny of America's power core. The world ultimately remembers it by the name of its chairman, Senator Frank Church of Idaho, a thoughtful and measured politician, yet deeply troubled. The Church Committee was not born of vengeance. Frank Church himself was a product of the system. He firmly believed in the necessity of robust intelligence agencies. He was no radical, but a guardian seeking to prune dead branches to save the tree. Yet when the hearings commenced, and witnesses took the oath, the first classified documents were declassified and delivered in sealed briefcases. The committee realized they were confronting not a few dead branches, but an entire rotten forest. The committee staff, a group of promising young lawyers and investigators, began the work in restrained shock. They issued subpoenas for documents and summoned witnesses. Gradually, they uncovered a plan so bizarre and morally bankrupt it bordered on fiction. This plan bore a cold, clinical code name, MKUltra. When they demanded the files from the CIA, they encountered stonewalling bureaucrats who insisted the files simply didn't exist. The investigation reached an impasse. This was dismissed as nothing more than ghost stories concocted by disgruntled former operatives. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place, the Office of Management and Budget. As investigators sifted through mountains of obscure financial records, they uncovered a series of peculiar budget discrepancies. From the 1952 to 1960 funds were transferred from one mysterious project to another, ultimately flowing into an account named MKUltra. The flow of funds was undeniable, like dinosaur footprints. Armed with this evidence, the committee intensified its pressure. CIA Director William Corby, tasked with cleaning up a house he didn't build, found himself in a bind. He knew the truth the committee pursued was real, and understood former Director Richard Helms had employed extraordinary measures to conceal it. 1973, as the shadow of Watergate loomed, and all government secrets seemed poised to be exposed, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decisive choice. This old minor school intelligence officer firmly believed that state secrets must be protected at all costs, not to guard against foreign enemies, but to shield them from the prying eyes of the American public and its elected representatives. He was convinced he was safeguarding the agency, so he ordered destroy everything. Destroy all files related to the MKUltra program. This destruction itself became a silent epic of terror. It was not the simple burning of books in a backyard. It was a systematic administrative purge. Upon receiving the directive, agency staff and officials rushed to the filing cabinets and vaults, those temples housing the program's history. They pulled out thousands of folders. They sent documents page by page into shredders, incinerated in classified incinerators. Years of research data, action reports, receipts from San Francisco brothels, medical records of unsuspecting American citizens, psychological dossiers, painful failures and chilling success stories, all reduced to ashen fragments. Helms later testified coldly that he merely wished to prevent these materials from being misinterpreted. A masterclass in understatement. He ordered the program's memory erased from official records, a preemptive lobotomy performed on the institution itself. But the eraser was imperfect, as all things are in this world. Financial records survived in machine code, and through sheer bureaucratic error, one box of files was misfilled, sent to the wrong archive and forgotten. Approximately 8,000 pages of documents. These files were discovered in 1977, 2 years after the Commission released its final report, becoming a chilling epilogue. Yet as early as 1975, The Church Commission possessed sufficient evidence records tracing the flow of funds. Testimony from former operatives like Sidney Got-to-Tell, who appeared in court wearing a mask of weary remorse, alongside victims' families just beginning to grasp their loved ones' ordeal. The televised hearings unfolded in sullen silence. Yet what unfolded before the world was horrifying. The Commission revealed to a stunned nation for decades. The government had secretly executed a massive program to control human minds. They employed hypnosis, electroshock, sensory deprivation, and the most notorious of all, lysergic acid dilhamid. LSD. These methods were administered to American citizens without informed consent. Subjects included prisoners, psychiatric patients, drug users and prostitutes. They established front organizations like the Human Ecology Research Association to funnel funds to unsuspecting university researchers. These sponsors were actually CIA agents in secret apartments set up in New York and San Francisco, equipped with one-way mirrors and recording devices. Agents lured victims through prostitutes to observe the effects of LSD on them. The scale was staggering: 149 projects, 80 institutions, including 40 for universities, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. The roster of participants rivaled the pulps by novel. CIA chemists, gangsters, scholars, magicians. The program's dry bureaucratic language claimed its goal was to study techniques for manipulating human behavior. The reality was a sordid, chaotic, and absurd pursuits seeking a magic bullet, truth serum, memory minus, erasing drugs, attempts to create programmable assassins, puppet candidates. For the American public following these events, the exposure of Project MK Ultra dealt a fatal blow to already fragile trust. The CIA not only monitored activists, but treated its own citizens as guinea pigs for mad science experiments. This scandal rocked the nation, dominating newspaper headlines for months. It not only validated the wildest conspiracy theories, but spawned countless new ones. How could a covert agency operate with such brazen impunity above the law? How could it, with almost no oversight, harbor such profound contempt for the very citizens it was sworn to protect? This realization became deeply ingrained in the national consciousness. The reluctant investigator Frank Church had opened a door, behind which lay a chamber filled with the nation's deepest nightmares. The committee's final report read like a scathing indictment, formally documenting a secret history that unfolded beneath the surface of American society for an entire generation. The secrets were exposed, but the specter of the program had only just begun to stir. The reverberations of the Church Committee hearings did not fade with the evening news. For decades afterward, they continued to echo in courtrooms and family homes. The final report was bound in somber government blue, but for the victims and their families, this report felt like a fresh, bleeding wound. The official narrative, though horrifying, remained abstract. Data points, project numbers, names blacked out. The reality was countless individual lives shattered by the program, lives that never even knew it existed. The quest for accountability began. Long, we wade into the gritty, arduous, and deeply painful. This battle wasn't fought in secret safe houses, but within the slow, heavy gears of the American justice system. The story of the Olsen family perhaps best captures the bleakness of this aftermath. For 22 years, the family of Frank Olsen, the army biochemist who fell from a window at New York Street, Regis Hotel, carried a simple tragedy. They were told he had suffered a mental breakdown and jumped himself. It was a private grief, a private tragedy. But in 1975, they watched the congressional hearings alongside the entire nation, when testimony revealed an unsuspecting scientist had been secretly administered LSD before falling to his death. 9 days later, the Olsens discovered the details matched their loved one's ordeal perfectly. This private tragedy was suddenly exposed to the public in a horrifying manner. Faced with a public relations nightmare, the government could no longer sustain the lies concealing the truth. President Gerald Ford invited the Olsons to the White House to formally apologize. CIA Director William Colby handed them heavily redacted case files. The scene was utterly absurd. The nation's highest authority publicly apologizing for a covert assassination operation carried out by its intelligence agency. The government offered a $750,000 settlement. This enormous sum was intended to settle old accounts and soothe the wounds. The Olsons accepted. For a moment, it seemed settled, but it was not. Even the redacted files concealed darker truths. Frank Olson was no innocent victim of a runaway drug experiment. As a senior scientist at Fort Detrick, he had been deeply involved in the military's most classified biological warfare programs. Later, he developed moral doubts and attempted to resign. His sons, Eric and Niels, spent decades relentlessly pursuing the truth. They ultimately concluded their father's death was not a drug-induced suicide, but a meticulously planned murder, an execution disguised as an accident, to silence a key witness. In 1994, they exhumed the body for examination. Though forensic evidence remained inconclusive, it hinted at deeper secrets. In 2012, the family filed another lawsuit, seeking not compensation, but documents, untruth. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed. The court ruled the 1976 settlement agreement had closed the case. From a legal standpoint, this book has been closed, but for the family and public records, questions remain hanging in the air, signaling that certain secrets once tightly sealed will eventually come to light. The Oren case is the most famous, but by no means the only one. These revelations are like opening a floodgate. The family of professional tennis player Harold Blau is one such case. He died in 1953 at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, admitted for treatment of depression. He was told he would receive a new combination of drugs. In reality, he became an unwitting subject in a military-funded experiment, testing a potent hallucinogen, a methamphetamine derivative. He was secretly injected with 5 large doses of the drug. After the final injection, he died suddenly from convulsions. For 22 years, his family was told the cause of death was congenital heart disease. A church committee uncovered the truth. The government eventually reached an court settlement with the estate administrators. Then there was Stanley Glickman, a struggling artist in Paris. In 1952, he was lured into a cafe by a CIA agent. LSD was slipped into his coffee. The experience was horrifying. Glikm and ascended into a year-long psychotic episode. His life and career were destroyed. He sued the government. After a lengthy legal battle, the judge finally ruled in his favor, acknowledging the profound harm inflicted. Countless other nameless victims exist. Those who, drugged, silently slipped to the margins of society. Their lives were utterly upended by an experience forever incomprehensible. Those already vulnerable psychiatric patients. Their accounts of bizarre psychological torment were dismissed as symptoms of illness and ignored. Their stories have vanished, buried in destroyed files and the silent collusion of time. Coexisting with these shattered lives is a broader, more insidious legacy. Public trust suffered profound and lasting erosion. The exposure of MKUltra and CINTINTLPRO, alongside revelations of unlawful domestic surveillance, have created a deep chasm between the American people and their intelligence agencies. These agencies are no longer seen as benevolent guardians, but have transformed into darker, more lawless entities, a shadow government operating by its own rules. This is not the paranoid delusion of liberals, but has become mainstream consensus. I don't trust the government. This declaration has leapt from the slogans of fringe groups to become an everyday sentiment at dinner tables. This distrust became a permanent feature of America's political ecosystem, nourishing all manner of conspiracy theories, some plausible, some utterly preposterous, further complicating the already difficult task of intelligence gathering. From the NSA's wiretapping programs to the massive data collection of the digital age, whenever new government surveillance practices are exposed, the public inevitably views them through the prism of MKUltra. How much more are they hiding from us? Though formally terminated in the 1972, its ideological toxins continue seeping into the groundwater of the national psyche. It taught an entire generation a terrifying lesson that their government might view them as exploitable resources, rather than citizens deserving protection. As test subjects in a control laboratory, such awareness is indelible. That shadow never fades. Whispers of suspicion, malicious assumptions, the conviction that darker secrets remain to be uncovered. This is MKUltra's true, enduring legacy, the shadow it casts, the whispers and perpetual uncertainty, signaling truth still buried deep in darkness. Yet the story of this strange, potent molecule did not end in hearing rooms, courtrooms, or the yellowed pages of conspiracy newsletters. After MKUltra concluded, in the decades following the collapse of the 1962 counterculture movement, LSD and its chemical kin fell into a deep hibernation, banished from laboratories, shut out of clinical practice. Psychedelic research itself became a toxic concept, surviving only as a career mine ascending obsession among fringe scholars. This substance, once revered by some as a key to unlocking the mysteries of the mind, viewed by others as a weapon for mind control, now they are reduced to an entry on a control list. Controlled substances, highest hazard category, no recognized medical use, high potential for abuse. The door described by Aldous Huxley not only closed, but sealed shut, barricaded, labeled with biohazard warnings. Yet history, like consciousness itself, flows unpredictably. During the molecule's exile, the world transformed profoundly. Scientific tools have become extraordinarily precise. Brain imaging technologies like functional magnetic resonance imaging and positron emission tomography have emerged, allowing us to observe the intricate dance of neural networks within the living brain at work. Meanwhile, the field of psychiatry, despite advances in pharmacological treatments like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, remains inadequate in addressing severe, treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the profound existential anxiety accompanying terminal illness. Existing therapies often prove inadequate. The depth of suffering makes the urgent need for new treatments undeniable. A handful of dedicated researchers, proceeding with slow and cautious steps, have begun reintroducing psychedelic drugs from the wilderness into the scientific spotlight. This is not the movement championed by Timothy Leary's disciples, to open minds, to access the cosmos, and withdraw from the world movement, but rather step by step, exploration led by seasoned scientists guiding patients through the labyrinth of regulations. A pivotal figure in this quiet revival is Rick Dublin, who founded an organization with a rigorously academic name in 1986, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, for decades. The association has operated on the fringes, raising funds through donations, financing small-scale studies, and persistently lobbying regulators like the FDA to secure permits for formal clinical trials. This strategy stood in stark contrast to the 1960s, no longer pursuing cultural revolution, but focusing instead on data, rigorously quantified peer-reviewed data. By the early 21st century, the tide began to turn, as the world's top universities launched the first modern controlled studies: Johns Hopkins University, New York University, Imperial College London, University of California, Los Angeles. These studies stood in stark contrast to the hasty, unethical experiments of the MK Ultra era. The difference could not be more evident. CIA black sites were replaced by meticulously designed, comfortable treatment rooms, soft lighting, curated music, and comfortable furnishings created a healing atmosphere. Secret dosing of unsuspecting subjects was replaced by rigorous screening processes. Recruited volunteers signed fully informed consent forms. The goal was no longer control, but healing. The research protocol itself exemplifies this novel therapeutic approach. Participants in modern psilocybin or LSD studies are not simply given a dose and dismissed. The entire process is grounded in a deep psychotherapeutic framework after weeks of preparation. Trained therapists established rust and set therapeutic goals. The 6- to 8- or psychedelic experience is continuously supervised by 2 facilitators. Participants are guided to lie down, wear an eye mask, listen to specially curated music, directing attention inward. The drug itself is not the treatment, but a catalyst for profound psychological experiences. These experiences are gradually integrated over subsequent weeks or months of therapy. It acts as a key, unlocking the mind's window, expanding cognitive perspective, while facilitating deep emotional processing, thereby enhancing therapeutic efficacy. Research findings published in top scientific journals are remarkable. Studies from Johns Hopkins University and New York University reveal that a single high dose of psilocybin, the active compound in psychedelic mushrooms, combined with psychotherapy, can rapidly, significantly, and sustainably reduce anxiety and depression symptoms in life-threatening cancer patients. For individuals facing death, this experience often brings unprecedented peace, connection, and acceptance. While it does not cure cancer, it profoundly transforms the patient's life experience. Meanwhile, the MAPS organization is pioneering research into MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, for treating severe chronic post-traumatic stress disorder PTSD. Its clinical trials focus on veterans and first responders, whose deep-seated trauma remains unreachable by conventional methods. The trials have shown remarkable efficacy, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has granted breakthrough therapy designation to accelerate its approval as a prescription medication. This irony is almost too perfect to be true. The psychological torment, once fueled and intensified by military intelligence agencies, is now being alleviated through careful pharmaceutical treatment. Using very substances the CIA once sought to weaponize LSD story appears to have come full circle. The chemical discovered by Albert Hofmann in a Basel laboratory, once held as a promise for understanding consciousness, then weaponized for mind control, has ultimately become a spiritual talisman for a generation. Now it returns, not with fanfare, but accompanied by the low hum of brain scanners, the soft guidance of therapists, the sterile precision of clinical trials. The psychedelic renaissance is not a replay of the 1960 seconds, but a new beginning. A slow, rigorous re-examination of a group of molecules misunderstood, abused, and feared for half a century. This work remains in its infancy, facing formidable problems and challenges. Yet after so many years, the protagonists of this dialogue are no longer spies or cult leaders, but scientists and therapists. A hidden history is being rewritten, quietly nurturing cautious hope. This strange key that once sought to lock the mind in the right hands might instead unlock the door to the soul.